Hey ladies, have you heard the news? I have an amazing intuitive eating principles series right here on the podcast. And to help you dig deeper into your relationship with food and body, I have created a downloadable workbook that goes right along with the series. This is going to help you dig a little deeper into your own health, your own food story, and eating experience. Included is a weekly release of workbook pages, which will have a summary of key points from the episode, a personal notes section, and here's the most important part, you're going to have bonus reflection questions to go along with each of the episodes. This is going to help you dig a little deeper, understand yourself and your relationship with food and body better. You can purchase this workbook at any time and go through episodes 133 to 143. This workbook that I've created is for someone who is brand new to intuitive eating, just starting to learn. This is also for somebody who has really no idea what intuitive eating is at all. This workbook is also helpful if you have been on the intuitive eating journey and you just want to continue on that and dig a little deeper. Head to healthcoachforlife.com/IE workbook or head into the show notes of any of the episodes from the series. Well, hey there, and welcome to the Health, Life, and More for Women podcast. I am your host, Jennifer D'Amato, and I'm so excited because this episode 133, marks the beginning of our amazing series on intuitive eating. Little fun fact, my favorite number has always been the number 3, so I'm sort of nerdy geeking out that there are 2 3s in this episode. For me, it's a good sign. It's a really, really good sign. For you, it's a great sign because if you have been wondering about intuitive eating, if you've been looking for, an easy resource to kind of just get the basics down, understanding, answer your questions, and dig a little deeper for yourself. Explore your own thoughts, your history, your story with diet culture. This is going to be amazing. It is the whole summer, you and I hanging out here on the podcast, diving into each of the principles of intuitive eating. And it starts right here. So excited. Now, hopefully by now you purchased the workbook that goes along with all of these episodes. If you're like, what are you talking about? Maybe you skipped over the intro. It was not my normal intro. It was sharing about the workbook that I've created that starts with this episode, what is and is not intuitive eating, and then we'll follow along each and every week with the episodes through each of the principles. It's a one-time payment for 11 weeks of content. I have never done something like this before that makes it so easy to kind of work with me in like this virtual sense. I mean, this is going to be a tool you can come back to, a tool you can keep exploring, and it's always going to be available to you. That's really the great thing. You pay one time and you can keep coming back to this resource, to these episodes, into the work. You can kind of track your own progress, look a little bit deeper. Some of the principles, when we go into them, you might not feel ready. You might not feel like you can go there yet, and you want to just stay on one. You want to get the information, but you want to come back to that. You're going to have that available. So if you haven't already, pause, head into the show notes, purchase the workbook. It's going to be immediately available to you. You can download those pages. And then each week I will send you an email and you'll have the next pages the day before the episode airs. I know, I like to be really prepared. So you can feel really prepared no matter what day of the week you listen to the episode. Now, the reason I decided to do this kind of pre-principles episode, kind of this introduction, is because I believe there's a lot of information out there on the World Wide Web. Does anyone say that anymore? I believe there's a lot of information on the internet that is really, really good. And there's a lot of information that's really, really bad. There's so much misinformation about intuitive eating. And part of that has, I think, increased recently because diet culture's figured out that women and men are sick and tired of dieting. They know it doesn't work. They're searching for another answer. They're finding intuitive eating. And diet culture is going, oh crap. If they're looking for intuitive eating, we need to start using that language. We need to look like intuitive eating. Even though we're a diet, even though we're totally focused on weight loss and everything that is kind of encompassing diet culture, we need to use the terminology. We need to come up on their Google searches. We need to be found so they stay in diet culture. So there's so much misinformation. I felt it was really important to start this series off just explaining what is intuitive eating, but we need to also address what is not intuitive eating. So that's really what I want to give as our kind of guideline for this episode, kind of where we're going to go. I want to share about intuitive eating. And then each week after, I'm going to dedicate the entire episode to one of the principles. So the first question is, what is intuitive eating? What is this concept of intuitive eating? Let me give you just a little bit of history of intuitive eating. So it was this concept created by two registered dietitians in 1995. That fact usually surprises people when I tell them that because I think a lot of people think it's a new concept, a new way of practicing, but it's actually not. It's been around for quite some time. I'll even share my thoughts on that part right now, that I always say, yes, this is a concept, if you will, this term, intuitive eating, created by two dietitians, Evelyn and Elise. I actually trained under Evelyn, and it was a highlight of my career so far. But I always say, yes, they kind of put the framework together, but, and this is the part that I think is so important to grasp. This is how you were created. Intuitive eating is actually getting you back to how your body worked before any messages about food and body image, about movement, like any judgments and guilt, surrounding food, any rules about food, like before anything ever existed. It's how you were created. It's how your body was meant to function. It's what your body knew how to do. I love that these two women went back to the basics, went back to how your body was designed to work. Now, I always say that with a little asterisk, I know that there are, of course, situations where someone's body does not work that way. I 100% acknowledge that. However, in a very general sense, this is how our body was created. It was created without food guilt. Our brains did not think about denying hunger. Our bodies were meant to change, and we weren't created fighting that. Can you imagine as an infant or a toddler just being like, no, don't grow, no, don't change? That's not even something our brain can get to, because we're like, of course our bodies are supposed to change. Of course, when that baby's hungry, it's gonna cry. Like, we don't deny that. But we're usually taught from a very young age to not trust ourselves. Unfortunately, those messages come in really, really subtle ways. Clear your plate. Questions of, are you going to eat all that? Things like making remarks of, do you really need to have a second helping? All of those things can start very, very young. Now, I want to go back to what I was saying. This concept was created in 1995. This book was released, and of course, it combated diet culture. It stepped in the gap, though, for people who were like, wait a minute, diets don't work, but I don't trust my own body. What do I do? And I really believe that when we're in that place, we do need some sort of framework, some guidelines, We can use the word principles. That's what they used here. And I really do love the word guidelines. We need that, some type of structure to help us get back to what our body knows. Now, if you've read the book or you've heard me talk for a while, you know that the focus of intuitive eating really is this mind body connection. And what that just simply means is our thoughts are connected to our body and we want them in sync. We want them to connect with one another. I also firmly believe that intuitive eating is personal. It is this general, guidelines, but you have your own story. You have your own history with food. You have your own thoughts and experiences. So this work, as much as there's these, general principles and guidelines, it is personal. I really don't care what kind of expert you'd be working with. No one is an expert on your body except for you. And that's something like I hold true for every single client I work with. Yes, I can walk you through these principles. And one of the things that happens in my coaching sessions all the time is, wow, that's a really good question because, they just haven't gone there. They haven't explored those thoughts, but it's for them to answer, them to explore their own thoughts, their beliefs, what's happening in their own body because they're the expert. You are the expert on your body. And this is the part about intuitive eating that does set it apart. It does set it apart from anyone even using the terms intuitive eating, yet giving you rules and guidelines of their own. You must follow this. You should do this. That's how you'll know. That's actually just one of many ways you'll know, wait a minute, that's not intuitive eating. Like I said, if we're going to discuss what intuitive eating is, we also need to discuss what it is not. And if there are any rules that you have to follow, if there's any shoulds you should be doing, that's not intuitive eating. If someone else is the expert on what you should be doing, right? If they're posing themselves in that way and telling you like you need to follow this plan and you need to eat these things and this is the time you eat and this is how much you work out, but this is intuitive. Wrong. That is not intuitive eating. There are no rules, there are no shoulds. This is about self-care. This is about reconnecting with your body, not what someone else believes you should be doing. Intuitive eating is not focused on your weight or weight loss. That is one of those other big fundamentals. Like, I want you to get that. If someone's talking about intuitive eating and saying, and you can lose weight, that's like the red flag of all red flags. Like, where's my emojis? Like, boop, boop, boop. I'm hitting that 17 times. Red flag. The reason we do not focus on weight loss with intuitive eating is because it's the number one disruptor to reconnecting with your body, to rebuilding that trust. There is no pass or fail with intuitive eating. I know that's one of the things my clients love most about this is they can't fail. They're always learning something. They're always reflective. They're always curious. With dieting or someone using intuitive eating as a diet, there's still going to be a level or a degree of passing and failing. That, okay, I want you to get this. If you eat beyond fullness and it feels like failure, that's not intuitive eating. If someone's teaching you and saying it's intuitive eating and you can only eat when you're actually biologically hungry, that's also not intuitive eating. These are some very clear red flags and some ways you can start discerning, wait a minute, is this really intuitive eating or are they using the term to get me to buy in? One last point I want to make about intuitive eating here is that it is research backed. There are, I think to date, it's over 80 now. It's been a growing body of research on the benefits of intuitive eating. Now, all of the benefits are important. Things like improved biomarkers, a lower risk for eating disorders, since we know dieting is like the number one leading factor to eating disorders. So, this is amazing. Benefits for your blood sugar and cholesterol and just, trusting your body. But here's the one that gets me every single time. Intuitive eaters are more satisfied. They're freaking happier. Intuitive eaters are happier. And I think about my own story and how miserable I spent years and years and years dieting. And as an intuitive eater, my goodness, I'm so much happier. Not just with food. I mean, yes, with food, but not just with food. It is amazing, that shift. I do believe part of that is because intuitive eating is centered around self care. It is because, like, the core of this work is self care. And when we prioritize that in one area, it's like spreads like wildfire into all other areas of our life. Now, it does consist of 10 principles. I want to share those with you now because I want you to start even exploring your thoughts about them as I'm sharing them with you. So, number one, reject the diet mentality. The second principle, honor your hunger. Number three, make peace with food. Number four, challenge the food police. Number five, discover the satisfaction factor. Number six, feel your fullness. Number seven, cope with your emotions with kindness. The eighth principle, respect your body. Number nine, movement, feel the difference. And number 10, honor your health with gentle nutrition. I cannot wait to dive into each of these. Next week's episode, we are talking all about rejecting the diet mentality. There's a reason it's number one. There's a reason it is so important to discuss that first. And I have some amazing reflection questions for that principle, some work that we're going to dive into right here on the podcast episode. So if you kind of put it off and said, well, maybe I'll get the workbook, I have questions from this episode and the next ones and the next ones that you're going to want to dive into. You have a place to put your own notes and questions you might have because I'm discussing, these principles, this information, and you might actually have a question you want answered. So go ahead, grab the workbook if you haven't already. I cannot wait to dive into this series, spend the entire summer hanging out with you right here on the podcast through each of the principles of intuitive eating. Now, I do want to say real quickly, if you're catching this at any time, like you just became a new listener, you're finding this episode 133 for the first time, you can always go in, purchase the workbook, and follow along no matter when it is. All right, ladies, can't wait to dive into principle number one, reject the diet mentality.